by Ram Trucks, built to serve.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to First Things First. I'm Jenna Wolf. This is Nick Wright. Chris Canty's here. We got a great show for you today as Fox salutes all of our veterans and active members of the military, some of whom kind enough, nice enough to join us here in studio with us this morning. Thank you
guys for coming. This is great. We got a legitimate studio audience, and it's a very accomplished studio audience. We don't typically have an audience around here except for on television. It's great to have you guys in. Thank you guys so much.
Now we can get actual audience
reaction
to whatever Nick has to say.
Booze, cat calls.
You're absolutely right, Jenna, because sometimes Nick come up here and he's talking crazy.
Oh, that is true.
So we got to just make sure that we have an audience to help keep him in line.
And I see the little fan in the Giants gear. When we talk Giants, you're probably going to boo me, pal. Like, it's just going to happen.
All right, well, here we go. We got a lot to get to today. We're going to jump right in with a little Thursday night football. Boy, it was a good one last night. Oakland Raiders hosting the Los Angeles Chargers, and we are going to pick this one up in the fourth. Just over 4 minutes left. Phillip Rivers hits Austin Eckler for a 6-yard touchdown to give the Chargers the lead. Rare highlight for Rivers, who had a tough game with 2 touchdowns, 3 picks. Raiders rookie Josh Jacobs, he's been so good this season, capping off a 10-play drive with his 7th touchdown of the year. Raiders up 2, but the Chargers would have one last chance to connect with Keenan Allen on a 4th down. That was picked up by Carl Joseph. How about a big win for the Raiders? They improved to 5-4 on the season. Here's John Gruden, who celebrated with Raider Nation after the game.
Every win, I'm going down there. I got face paint all over me. I got to see some costumes I have not seen before at any football games. Awesome.
So we don't often see that jubilation from John Gruden. That was jubilation. So we talked a lot about the Raiders before the season. They were previewed in Hard Knocks. Yep. We didn't think that much of them just because of who they had, how many games they won last year. Did we underestimate Gruden and the Raiders as a legit playoff team, Nick?
I certainly did. I have to give them credit. They have had a brutal slate, as the entire AFC West has, drawing the NFC North as your cross-conference division. The AFC South, which, while it might not have a great team, doesn't have a terrible team that you can just walk over. The Raiders also had the impossible task of, hey, you're going to play at home in week 2, and then you're not going to play at home again until week 9, which is the situation they had because they're moving stadiums. And I think the NFL didn't want them to have any more games with the baseball diamond on the field, so they sent them on a road trip. They sent them over to London, and they're now finally getting back home. And through that brutal schedule, through that impossible road trip, through the Antonio Brown mess, they're 5-4. And as you said before the show, Canty, they find themselves in the absolute thick of the AFC wildcard hunt. And by the way, I think the 5-4 is fitting to become 7-4 because they have Cincinnati and the Jets coming up as their next 2 games. Cincinnati, they'll, of course, have a little extra time to prepare, having played on a Thursday. So I have to give the Raiders credit. Gruden has been a punchline on this show. The Raiders have been an afterthought on this show. They are far better than I expected them to be coming into the year, and they have put themselves in position to do exactly what they wanted to do when Gruden got there, which is have legitimate optimism by the time they move to Vegas. I think they are well on their way to accomplishing that goal.
No, they are, and I got to stand on that corner with you because I didn't believe in the Raiders coming into this season either. And Jenna, I think the big issue is when you get rid of generational talents like Khalil Mack and Amari Cooper, it's hard to envision your football team after a talent drain becoming more competitive. But that's exactly what the Raiders have been in every single game this season. I mean, save the week 2 matchup that they had at home against the Kansas City Chiefs. That's the only game where I looked at and said, maybe not so much because Pat Mahomes threw 4 touchdown passes in the second quarter. But if you look at the 4 losses that this Raiders team has, the Chiefs, the Green Bay Packers, the Minnesota Vikings, and the Houston Texans, all teams going into week 10 that have 6 wins or better. So you're talking about playing against the cream of the NFL, and this team is hanging in there and competing against that group. But the fact that they've been so competitive, the fact that it's a relatively young group, I think people have to be optimistic about where the arrow is pointed for this Oakland Raiders team.
And since that 1-2 start, those 2 losses, Green Bay and Houston, people got to keep in mind the context. The Green Bay loss, they're about to take the lead headed into halftime. Derek Carr fumbles reaching for the pylon. Green Bay takes it down and scores, gets the next kickoff, scores. All of a sudden, that game gets away from them in a game where they had played really well in the first half. and they had the Texans beat.
Yep.
That's a brutal loss because they played well enough to win. That's the game Deshaun Watson gets kicked in the face, right? Fixes his face mask, throws the game-winning touchdown. But since that 1-2 start, their 2 losses are to one excellent team in Green Bay, one game where they played well enough to win against a good team in Houston, and otherwise a game like last night, they had plenty of opportunities not to win it last night, up to and including the final drive after Carlson misses the extra point, and they hung on to put themselves in this position.
It's not just about what you mentioned, losing Amari Cooper and Khalil Mack. It's getting guys like Rich Incognito. It's what happened with Antonio Brown. It's distractions. It was the cameras in training camp. Vontaze perfect with what happened there. But then you look at this team and you say, well, what's the theme? And it's been resilience. It was last week's win against Detroit. It was last night's win over the Chargers. It's like every time they're down or trailing in a game, they somehow find a way to come back in and win. Realistically, how far can this team go?
Well, I think this can be a wild card team. I mean, you look at the AFC landscape, I think we have to pencil in Buffalo as one of the wild card winners based on what they've done to this point and what their upcoming schedule is. But, I mean, the Raiders are right there with the Colts. I mean, the Raiders only play one team with a winning record in their final 7 games. So they have a real opportunity here. And keep in mind, they hold the head-to-head tiebreaker with the Colts because they beat them earlier this season in Indy. But in looking at this Raiders team, yeah, I absolutely believe that they can be a wild card team. And that's in part based on the play that we've seen from Derek Carr. I mean, in 8 of the 9 games that they've played this season, he's had a 95 passer rating or better. He's not making mistakes. I think he understands who he is as a quarterback, but more so he understands who he's not as a quarterback. And all you have to do is point to the last game-winning drives that he had, 2 in the last 5 days, the one against the Detroit Lions, and then the one he had last night where he was a combined 8 for 11 for 116 yards, a touchdown, and a 136 passer rating. When your quarterback is playing like that in the critical moments of a game, you're always going to have a chance. You're always going to be competitive. And based on the opponents that they have on their upcoming schedule, you have to feel good about their position to try to take a stranglehold on that second wild card.
2 points, one on Carr. Well, I think for Carr, it's not just that he's played the best football we've seen him play since the year where he broke his leg at the tail end of the season, where he was probably going to finish somewhere in the top 4 or 5 of the MVP discussion had he not suffered the injury. But I also think Derek Carr was playing for his future as an Oakland Raider this year. They can get out of this contract after this season. John Gruden was very, very high on Carr when he got to Oakland. Seemed less high on Carr after spending a year with him. I think one of the reasons they made the trades they made was to accumulate draft capital in case they needed to go get a quarterback. Derek Carr solidified himself that he's going to be the quarterback of this team when they go to Vegas next season. But the other thing both of you mentioned is the trades, most notably the Khalil Mack trade. And this is where, and this is a self-inflicted wound, John Gruden let the narrative get away from him immediately. He should have instantly said, listen, obviously, we are in the short term going to be worse because we traded a great player for players that are not yet on the team. You guys say what you want about the trade. I think it's fair to ask you not to evaluate it until we get our return. Had he said that, right now he could be saying, have you checked on the Khalil Mack trade lately? Because the first pick we got from that is Josh Jacobs, who's on pace for 1,400 yards and might win Offensive Rookie of the Year. The next pick all of a sudden looks like a top 10 pick from the Chicago Bears. Something people weren't saying last year. It was like, oh, man.
Even this year.
Going into this season. And so the narrative got away from him on that. You're always going to be worse in the short term when you trade a player for picks. That should have been the messaging from the Raiders. Had it been, I think maybe his first year, the narrative of his first year would have been a little bit different. Instead, every week we saw Khalil Mack get a strip sack. We saw the Raiders not be able to sack the quarterback, and we called John Gruden a doofus. And so right now, this team has to be one of the surprises in football.
TV doesn't work out for you. PR, Nick. You're really good at what people could have, should have,
That's what he should have said, man.
Take a break. Coming up, are Dak and the Cowboys in trouble against the Vikings? That's next on FS1. You can always check us out on the Fox Sports channel on Sirius XM.